Hey everybody, Matthew Collar here from Purple Insider, and welcome to our brand new show. It is called Hot Routes. We're going to be doing it a couple of times a week here exclusively on our YouTube channel, and Paul Hodowanic, who is with me, will be hosting it every Monday and Wednesday. I will be on, Sam Ekstrom will be on, different guests that Paul grabs to come on, and the way Hot Routes works, if you haven't listened to the podcast version, is Paul has come up with 5 questions, some of them Vikings, some of them around the NFL, and usually they're a little different than maybe the questions we would ask each other on the podcast. They all have a unique spin. So I would highly suggest that you leave your answers to these Hot Routes questions in the comments. We can have a lot of fun there, and I hope you enjoy the show. Now, Paul, I will turn it over to you, the host of Hot Routes here on Purple Insider.
Well, hello, everyone. If you're not familiar with me, I've been on the podcast, helped Matthew behind the scenes for the past 2 years with Purple Insider. So if you've listened to the podcast, you know me as intern Paul, maybe turned professional Paul. This is full professional Paul here, starting this segment with you. I'm super excited, but yep, glad to bring our Hot Routes tradition from the podcast over and make this a full-time YouTube show twice a week, as you said. Super excited. And yeah, just really, really ready to get going. So if you'll allow it, we can jump right in right now.
Fire away.
Awesome. Well, after the first few games, it really seems like the Vikings found their wide receiver 3 in KJ Osborne. And that kind of made me think, during your bye-week bonanza, as I'm sure the YouTube watchers have seen, the podcast listeners have sure seen, I was reflecting back on where the Vikings were in terms of just in the broader NFL, where that trio ranks and kind of where it ranks in their history. And so my question to you is, do the Vikings have the best trio of wide receivers in the NFL right now?
I don't know that they quite have the best trio of wide receivers. In fact, I think that the team that they're going to play on Sunday Night Football probably has a little bit better of a case with Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and the great CeeDee Lamb. So we'll see the Vikings certainly tested in their secondary when they play against Dallas Cowboys. But the emergence of KJ Osborne has completely changed what this offense can do. And it reminds me a little bit more of what the Vikings had in 2017. They had Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, who were at the height of their powers playing great football with Case Keenum, but they also had Jarius Wright, who was very helpful and came up with a couple of big plays, including in the Minneapolis Miracle. Now, I think that KJ Osborne actually might be a little more gifted than Jarius Wright, but the idea that when push comes to shove and opponents start to double team your top receivers and put safeties over the top of Thielen and Jefferson in big moments, that's where we've seen KJ Osborne step up. He did it against Cincinnati. He did it once again against Carolina with a game-winning touchdown catch. So I think that the Vikings have a really good case. There aren't that many teams that have 3 weapons that can be relied upon at any time.
Yeah, I think it is the Cowboys when they're healthy. Gallup obviously hasn't seen the field much this year. I think we just got done watching a Bengals team with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. I think that's another really good trio. But I think the Vikings are firmly in that top 2, top 3 spot. And it had me wondering if that trio is better than the Diggs, Thielen, Wright trio going back. And to me, this might be the best wide receiver trio the Vikings have had since they had Moss, Carter, Jake Reed, in terms of if the production stays up. I was just looking at the numbers. The best season that the 3 of those wide receivers had was 1999. I think it was like 32 or like 3,300 yards combined. The Vikings right now, even on a 16-game pace, would just eclipse that, I believe. So obviously different trends in the NFL. I'm sure right now that trio might go for more yards than they did even then. But just from a pure talent standpoint, I think this has to be better than the Diggs, Thielen, Jarius Wright one, just because of that Osborne versus Wright matchup. We've seen Osborne do things that Jarius didn't really do. I mean, they're coming up with a lot of the same clutch catches, but he can do a lot more than those short, intermediate slot type catches. And I think he's gotten a designed run every once in a while on this team. I think that could be another way that they use him. So yeah, I think it's really exciting. I think we talk a lot about some of the negatives that we've seen so far this year, but the development of that wide receiver 3 is such a big thing for their future, whether it's Kirk Cousins or any other quarterback at the helm. And that kind of takes me into the second question, which is just if we could see any changes coming up. The trade deadline is here soon, and we just saw them ship off Stephen Weatherly. You did a video on that. If you're wanting a little bit more on that, go watch that. But should they trade for a cornerback? Patrick Peterson on the IR now. That leaves a lot for Cameron Dantzler, Brashad Breeland, Mackenzie Alexander. That unit hasn't been great so far. The PFF grades aren't awesome for them. And they've probably been saved a little bit by the pass rush, which has been really improved. So, in your standpoint, should they roll with Cameron Dantzler or should they trade for a cornerback?
No, I think that they should trade for a cornerback. As much as Cam Dantzler has shown at times flashes of having the ability to be a quality starting outside corner, there have also been flashes of him struggling. And we saw that against Carolina. He gave up a huge fourth down play to Sam Darnold and the Carolina Panthers. By the way, Sam Darnold also benched this week. He was struggling so much. And we also saw, even against the Cleveland Browns when Dantzler played a lot, he had his moments, but he also had some times where he gave up open wide receivers and Baker Mayfield just didn't make plays. Last year was the same story. He had a great game against Jacksonville and a great game against Chicago, and then also gave up some big plays like against Seattle where he got beat twice on a final drive. And this is a Vikings team that's very much all in on winning this year and making this second half of the season a playoff run. That's what they're going to call a success this season, is going from a tough start to the year all the way into the playoffs. And I think if you have sort of an all-in mentality, especially an all-in mentality that would cause you to trade a fourth-round pick for Chris Herndon, who has one catch so far this year, if you're going to do that, then I think you can look at veteran corners. Teams have really separated themselves at this point. You have teams that are on the bubble, teams that are competing for Super Bowls, and teams that are just completely done. And if there is a veteran corner on a team that is completely done, I think it makes a lot of sense to send a fifth-round pick or a sixth-round pick to get that player, because the prices at the trade deadline are usually not particularly high. It's hard to bring players in and get them acclimated to your system. But if there is a position that you could bring someone in to help, I think it is corner, where it's not as simple as just cover that wide receiver, but you can maybe simplify things for a corner. So it is a lot of just working man coverage, and even just to have a little extra depth in the case that Patrick Peterson's injury keeps him out for longer than expected.
Yeah, I differ a little bit on this. I think while it'd be nice to get a quality starter who you could get and put in place for Dantzler for a fifth, sixth, seventh round pick, it may be out there, but I'm not sure. I wonder if the guys you're getting for that type of compensation, if they're going to challenge Dantzler. Maybe it just provides depth, which would be nice. But in my eyes, what we've seen from Dantzler, like you said, is kind of that seesaw performance, I think. But when it's a high, he plays really well, and they still need to be worried about development here. And I was just looking at some of the names that they could go after. It's like maybe they could go after one of the Dolphins corners, Byron Jones, Xavier Howard. Both of those guys have been a little bit unhappy, but both those seem like it would take a little bit more than the Vikings are willing to give up for them. And then you're going, I saw Kyle Fuller on Sunday. Ian Rappaport tweeted Kyle Fuller, Denver, that he's kind of looking for a trade, or they're exploring options. That could be an option. He's only on a 1-year deal, $9 million, I believe. I think he'll want to cash in. So that would be something they have to consider, because he's another good corner, had his struggles this year, but he's a guy that maybe could step in right away. But other than that, I'm just not sure how many guys you're scooping up right now that are going to be in front of Dantzler. And I know they're all in, but at the same point, they really should be seeing what they have in Cam Dantzler to see if he can be someone that they can rely upon. And in my eyes, if you're not going to get one of those top names, you're really rolling the dice. I mean, they rolled the dice with Rashad Breeland, and that hasn't really turned out. So at this point, I'd honestly rather roll the dice with Dantzler, who's on the team, hope for some internal growth from him, hope for the high side of his performance to continue, and then maybe you have the starter you were looking for there. Now, if you can find someone cheap, I like that option, but I'm not quite sure it's there. So
yeah, I think, and the idea of letting Dantzler develop, I think in a different type of circumstance where maybe you didn't view yourself as a contender or didn't have so much pressure, you would say, yeah, find out, see if you have yourself a guy who could be here for a long time. In this situation, I mean, think about who they have coming up. I mean, they've got great quarterbacks, great wide receivers. They need to be able to win in this next stretch. And so if they were to, on Monday or Tuesday, make a couple phone calls and bring in somebody else that could help them fill out their depth at corner, I think it would be a good move.
yeah, and agreement there. If they can find a guy who's for just a 7th or 6th round pick, I like it. But if they're going to force another 4th rounder like they did for Herndon, just to try to kind of keep the ball rolling and kind of compound on a mistake that we've already feel like they made, that's where I feel like it's just not worth it. But speaking of them in the playoff scenario, my third hot route, just looking at the standings around them in the NFC right now, or coming into week 7, the Vikings were that 7th team. So they would have been in the playoffs if it ended right there. And looking at the teams below them, it's not like a murderer's row of teams you're super, super worried about of coming in. So I'm wondering which team is the most dangerous to you? Like, who do you see jumping up there? Because there's a lot of them I can see not doing it, and it seems like there's just a few that could leapfrog them.
No, I agree that there aren't many teams that you're really scared of when it comes to the Vikings, teams that are chasing them. The team that I would maybe be nervous about if I'm a Vikings fan would be the Chicago Bears, because they just seem to have the Vikings number in the last couple of years. Every time it's come down to Vikings and Bears, the Bears seem to come out on top and boot the Vikings out of the playoff race. It happened in 2018, and it happened last year as well, where if the Vikings beat the Chicago Bears, they go very likely into the playoffs. And instead, we end up with, the Vikings out of the playoffs. The Bears barely get in and then get smashed by the New Orleans Saints, which there's another team to talk about. That Jameis Winston has had such an up and down career that it's really hard to trust Jameis Winston. However, Sean Payton has not had an up and down career. He's had a tremendous career. And, okay, so he's working with a quarterback that is not Drew Brees anymore, but I think he is a really good offensive mind. I know Vikings fans are not always happy to compliment Sean Payton. They don't like him very much, but even when Teddy Bridgewater started for New Orleans, they went 5-0 in those games with Sean Payton calling the shots. So I think that those are the two teams the Vikings probably need to worry about the most.
Yeah, I would throw in San Francisco as one other team. They're kind of seesawing right now between Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo. Who knows who comes out of that? And they've seen kind of just some internal struggles this season, but they're another team just with Kyle Shanahan. I'm not going to count them out. And it pains me, but maybe if Geno can hold down the ship for a little bit longer, I'm never going to count out Russ, but they seem like maybe just the far end of that back end. And obviously the Vikings have a win on them for any sort of tiebreak situation. So you're feeling good about that. But I mean, you're crossing off Detroit, you're crossing off the Giants, you're crossing off the football team, probably the Panthers. You're going to cross off after their embarrassment with the Giants this week. And then it's really like Eagles, Falcons. And I don't see much with either of those. So I think it definitely is like we're seeing an up. They're going to have a struggle, the Vikings, these next couple games, 5 weeks or so. And that's the meat of their schedule. And they could drop a little bit, but if they just get 2 wins out of that, even 1 win with the teams that they have around him, they're still going to be in contention at that point. And so that is, if you're a believer in, okay, we need to go for it this year, we have a shot, the teams around him don't seem like they're going to give him much of a push. You really just have to beat the Bears the both times you play them. And if you do that, you're looking really, really good. And then you're hoping San Francisco doesn't turn things around and you can make the playoffs with the Saints still in it. So, we've been talking, it could really slide, but they still have an opportunity.
Yeah, the San Francisco game all of a sudden becomes very, very important. And like you said, I'm not really sure about their quarterback situation, but if Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, look at this team's record with Jimmy Garoppolo in versus anybody else, Nick Mullins, Trey Lance. They win all the time with him. I don't think he's the most impressive quarterback out there, but he beat the Vikings in the playoffs in 2019, and they have a really good supporting cast. You kind of just need someone who can keep the bus on the route there, which Garoppolo largely can. So I think going out to play them in San Francisco, a game that could have tie-breaking implications, that one very likely will be really important if Jimmy Garoppolo can get healthy and stay healthy through the rest of the year.
For sure. Let's move on. We're going to do some NFL topics on hot routes. And so the most pressing one just coming out of this week is the Chiefs. And oh boy, we saw that. That was the local game on CBS that we got. And man, they did not look good. Mahomes goes out right at the end of the game, looks like a concussion or something of that ilk. And are the Chiefs washed up, Matt?
Yes, I think they are. I really think they are. I think that the Chiefs, something is extremely off there that is not just their defense, but you expected their defense to have holes and to give up big plays and to be problematic at times because you can only keep good defenses together for so long. And they had a good defense when they won the Super Bowl, but it's just tough to do year after year after year to have a great defense. But normally it just didn't matter because Patrick Mahomes was so good. Their offense was so good. Their weapons were dominant. And suddenly it seems like some combination of maybe Patrick Mahomes isn't at 100% and he got banged up in that game against Tennessee. But even before he was hurt, he looked horrendous. They've also had some bad bounces. A lot of the interceptions have been tipped or balls that bounced up in the air and just happened to go into the hands of the other team. So I wouldn't suspect that they'll continue to turn the ball over quite at that rate. But whatever is ailing them, they're not just close and losing games by field goals. I mean, when they're playing good teams, they're getting beaten up by Buffalo. They're getting beat up by Tennessee. And I think they have too far to go to say, well, look, all they need to do is just X, Y, and Z. They've tried to bring in Josh Gordon. I don't know if he has anything left in the tank, but I think that shows you that part of this with the Chiefs is just how flawed their processes were. They gave out a huge contract to Frank Clark, who's not a great player anymore. They made a trade for a first rounder for Orlando Brown. That has not made a huge difference. They also 2 years ago spent a first round pick on a running back, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, thinking, oh, this guy will be our final piece. And they really haven't added wide receivers. It's Tyreek Hill. Travis Kelce is a tight end. There's only so much a tight end can do. And they let Sammy Watkins go. So they really don't have that second, third, fourth guy that Patrick Mahomes can go to. And I think that opposing teams said, we are just not going to let Tyreek Hill get behind us. And we are going to make you run the ball, which they can't do. We're going to make you throw underneath to guys who aren't that great of playmakers. And there you go. That's now a mediocre team that any week could be really good or really bad. But I now, after this week, do not consider them any type of Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, and we were watching them, and they were down maybe 27-3, and that was the first – I was watching them drive, and it was one of the first times where them down 24 still wasn't scary to me at that point. At that point, I was starting to think, can the defense put any stops together? Can the Chiefs avoid turnovers? And the answer was no. And they're the 31st ranked defense, according to PFF, or they were leading into this week. We'll see where the grades shake out. They're still the 6th on offense, but I think the difference is those turnovers you spoke of. Mahomes entering the week had 8. He added a 9th interception. And what's funny is he only had 7 turnover-worthy plays, according to PFF. So obviously some of those are fluky. Some weird things are happening. And so maybe it's a little bit of bad luck, but and one other stat I have for you. The Chiefs scored on 40.4% of their drives this season. So the offense is going really, really well. But when they're not scoring, it seems like they're turning the ball over. So Mahomes already matched his interception. He's over his interception total from last year. So they're still scoring on an insane amount of drives, but those turnovers are really killing them. So if those come down a little bit, I can see them getting better. But their schedule they're in that division that's super hard. And so they don't have a ton of softballs. They have the Giants next week. You assume they're going to win that. But then they go home Packers, at the Raiders, home for Dallas, another tough game against Dallas, home for Denver, home for the Vegas Raiders again. Then they're at the Chargers, Pittsburgh, at Cincy, who looks really, really good, and at Denver. So they don't have a ton of just, okay, they're going to wipe that team out. And so at this point, they're looking like they could be a 9-8, 8-9 team right around that range. That feels like where they could be.
Yeah, and if they don't make some sort of adjustment, or maybe there's a trade in the mix for them, but I mean, how much draft capital do they have left to trade? But, I think that what this shows you is that even when you have one of the greatest quarterbacks, you can't do everything else wrong. You can't turn the ball over constantly. You can't have the worst defense in the NFL. And if you're Andy Reid, I think there's some question to be asked. Like, did he really adapt here and adjust? I mean, Andy Reid has been one of the best offensive minds, and Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator, has been one of the best defensive minds as well. But if you don't adjust and you keep doing the same things over and over again, the NFL will find ways to solve you. And so not having a running game that is effective really at all, I think that hurts them. I mean, you just can't put everything on the back of a quarterback. We've seen even the greatest ever, John Elway, Dan Marino, Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, all of them have had a bad season or two mixed in to their careers. And I think this is it for them, and maybe a wake-up call that some of their processes probably need to change if they're going to get back to being the best team in the NFL.
All right, well, let's get back to the final hot route of the day. It was a fun game on Thursday night. It was kind of the Vikings backup quarterback bowl. We had Teddy, Case, and that's kind of when the juices started flowing for me. Okay, who would I prefer one game over? You start reminiscing back games, back when they played 2017, obviously comes to mind. Teddy, all the great memories there. And then obviously Taylor Heinicke against the Packers today. So there was just a lot of Vikings backup quarterbacks going around this week that I saw a lot of, because that Packers game was also the one other local game, so I was flip-flopping back forth. So I saw tons and tons of Vikings backup quarterbacks. And so my thought, to win one game, which of these Vikings backups are you taking?
Teddy, Case, or Taylor Heinicke, huh?
Yes.
Well, I will say Taylor Heinicke is a fun watch because he'll make an incredible play and then turn the ball over almost immediately right after that. So I'm going to eliminate Taylor Heinicke. It's been a fun story for him to be a guy who was a backup in the XFL and is now starting for Washington football team, but they haven't been all that competitive with him in outside of that one playoff game against Tampa Bay last year. So then it comes down to Teddy versus Case. Now, I think that Teddy Bridgewater is clearly the more talented of the two, but the version of Teddy Bridgewater that we see now versus the one that was up and coming in Minnesota are just not the same. You see flashes of that every once in a while, like a throw that he made to Cortland Sutton, the little touch pass that was right on the money. Like those are the throws that Vikings fans were expecting to come more and more and more had he not got hurt. Case Keenum, though, was very much Case Keenum. I mean, just the same sort of thing with Taylor Heinicke, but like a more refined version, a wild throw here or there, a gutsy play here or there. And he ultimately came out with a win for the Browns. But that was, I think, mostly because they ran the ball so successfully. So I'll still take Teddy Bridgewater. I think he's more talented. I definitely think that whatever magic Pat Shurmur had in 2017 has worn off, and their offense, running the ball a lot, getting behind the sticks, forcing Teddy to convert on 3rd and long. And they've had a few injuries that have hurt them as well. But I think if you were saying, okay, you've got a good team, a huge game to win, your starting quarterback is out, which one of these guys you pick? I still think you go Teddy Bridgewater.
I think I'm going to go Case, and maybe it's just nostalgia from 2017, and I want to relive him in the Diggs ball. I just want to relive all that and go with Case. And I think there is something, and I think it was something that it wasn't super quantifiable. And I think you got to it a little bit in your book about the season, and we've talked about since then. Just whatever Case had that the team rallied around a little bit. He might not have lit up the stat sheet in some of that. It wasn't impressive, but they played really well that season. Obviously, no thanks in part to the defense, of course, but something just makes me want to go Case. And it feels like he's going to pull plays out when they don't need to be, or they're not going to supposed to go their way. I think Teddy may have had that at the beginning of his career. It feels less and less like that's a part of his game now. And so for one game, maybe it's just still thinking about the 2017 game. I'm going to go Case.
Well, they had big games in the playoffs. One of them they won in magical fashion. The other one, not so much. And that's Case Keenum for you. And that's kind of how journeyman backups are. But good to see those two, though. Fun for Vikings fans to see, especially Teddy Bridgewater in the route that he's taken, but also Case Keenum to get a win after being relegated to a backup for a couple of years. So 3 very good stories. And I think there's an argument for either Teddy or Case for your question. So this was our first episode of Hot Routes. We'll be doing this all the time. Paul's going to be hosting, so look forward to it. Mondays and Wednesdays, it'll be up on the channel. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Actually, Paul, you need to say goodbye because you are the host of Hot Routes.
I am the host of Hot Routes, and I would just like to say any comments, anything people, any suggestions, leave them down in the comment section. I want to know what you want to see out of this show, and we're going to incorporate a lot of that. So I will say goodbye to everyone, and we will see you Wednesday for the next edition of Hot Routes.